look, if you keep these school-aged children in school and they attend school most days and they're keeping track in school and it's, I don't know, 85% of the days they have to be in school, at the end of the month, we'll send you money. And that money will be enough so that you can pay for their food. They don't have to work. And it's less money than they would get working normally, but it's enough because mothers want their children to go to school.
Yeah.
So cash transfers actually are quite effective at getting kids into school. They're less effective at reducing work altogether, but maybe that's not so bad because kids learn a lot from work.
Yeah.
If it's not abusive, there are very good things that can come out of that.
That makes a lot of sense. So you said you work a lot around like how child labor affects a child, like mentally or based off of school, correct? Or around school.
So there are different things. I believe that children should be learning as they grow up. Often school is the only place that learning is recognized, although there are many kinds of learning. Some of the kinds of learning happen when children help out around the home. I don't know if you have any little siblings, but the little ones, you see them, they love to help out.
Yeah.
Let me help set the table. I want to do it today.
It's
No,
great
it's
because then
my
I don't
turn.
have to do that.
Right. They want to help, and that's how they learn to grow up, is they learn to do all of those tasks alongside the other people, the older people who are doing them. And so having them participate naturally in those things, in the work that other people around them are doing, is a way that those children learn to do them. And so it's called, in psychology, it's called developmental benefits. So it helps them grow up. So it's about learning by doing rather than learning by sitting in a school and memorizing stuff, which is what children do in poor schools, in poor countries. So it's not great learning. It's not even as good as the worst schools in the United States. It's sitting in a classroom of 70 or 100 and being beaten if you move around, and it's rote memorization from what their teacher writes on the board, and then you repeat it back in the test. So the schools are not great, but people still want their kids to go to school, and kids still want to go to school, mostly, except maybe under the absolute worst conditions, but most kids still go, and they tolerate terrible heat and poor conditions in schools because they really want to learn. But sometimes that's not possible. And also, often schools don't provide the kind of learning that kids need in order to succeed later when they have to get a job when they're 15 or 16. They may need to know farming skills. So if you tell them, no, you can't help your family farm, how are they going to learn those things? How will they learn when to plant the crops, how to keep away the bugs, what to fertilize with, when to water, when to weed? Farming isn't as easy as people may think. And so, and many people in poor parts of the world are farmers. So if children grow up learning to do those things, then there's some hope of them feeding themselves when they have to. When they're 15, 16, 20, whenever they can get a little land. And if they want to get married, they need to be able to feed themselves.
Yeah. So then are there schools out there where they teach kids farming and then they also teach like math and stuff along with that, do you know? Because that sounds like a happy medium.
Yes, it would be. And there are a few, but in most countries in the global south, the educational system was inherited from colonial pasts, and so the structures of education were very much set in the old colonial days. And so even the subjects that children learn are not necessarily very useful. I mean, if it's harder to read if you're seeing a apple and you have no idea what an apple is.
Yeah.
Right? So even a lot of those really basic things are not appropriate and not context specific. So, and so learning to analyze literature isn't useful for that many people.
No, I don't even use it.
Exactly. But learning to keep a budget and learning about crops would make a lot of sense. But there's a big anti-agriculture bias in schools because of this colonial past, and mostly kids don't get that information there. Yeah.
That's a bummer. So going back more to like the extreme child labor, how does that, and you said you didn't like study it very much, but how does that affect a child like mentally and emotionally? Like, does that change them in any way rather than if they just grew up not having to do that and just doing like household chores and stuff?
So let's think about bonded labor. And in India, children are sold to pay debts of families, and then basically they have to go and work for some employer who might be a household wanting a domestic servant, or it might be somebody with a little workshop and they're producing copper bowls, or maybe it's a mechanic who wants a boy to do some work for him. So I think so it's really problematic because, number one, there's nobody watching out for that kid, and there's a lot of physical abuse. There's a lot of emotional abuse, yelling at kids, calling them terrible things, making them feel like there's nothing good about them. There's sexual abuse of children that they don't feel they can share with anybody. They have nowhere to go. They have nowhere to go back to. Often in India, children who have been sold don't even know where they're from. They couldn't go back if they wanted to because nobody told them, right? What village, what is this village, what is your family's name? I mean, it's just that there's so much information that they don't have. So being a slave is horrible, and there's all sorts of ramifications, and it just depends on how somebody is abused and how resilient they are, whether they are completely basically mentally destroyed or whether they're able to bounce back and say, oh, well, if I get rescued, then I can be thrilled to go to school and make a new life for myself. So it's really person specific. You could think about it the way you think about what happens to people who go to war. Some of them have post-traumatic stress disorder and some of them don't. So a lot of children in worst forms probably have some sort of post-traumatic stress disorder, even if they escape that. A lot of children in absolutely the worst conditions may die young because nobody is taking care of their health. So, I mean, it's not good, right? It's pretty horrible. So the challenge is trying to not decide for them and to allow them to have some control of their lives. So if you can help get them into better circumstances, they need to be part of that process of transition. So they need to be consulted. So the worst thing for children who have been abused in this way is to just start taking control over their lives just the way that their captors did, and moving them around and telling them what they have to do next. So children who learn to make decisions for themselves and to do things for themselves are children who grow up to be the strongest and most resilient.
So then you mentioned like taking kids out of those situations. Are there any organizations now that help take them out of those situations?
Yes, there are organizations all over the world that do that. Many of them are very small. I serve on the board of an organization called Indica that's based here in the United States, and and that's recently formed to support an organization that rescues domestic workers in India, so including children who have been sold into domestic service, or people who have become domestic workers because they had nowhere else to turn and they're abused. And so this organization provides lodgings for some women who are maids and some children who are maids, and helps, they call it rehabilitate them, helps provide them alternative ways of living. So there are organizations like that in pretty much every country that I know about, but many are fairly small. So they're too small to deal with the scale of the problem, but many people are doing what they can.
Awesome. I think that's all. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.